This video will cover how you can get this Bloodflame Samurai build going in about 40 minutes of starting a new game. We'll also cover the locations of every spell, talisman, and possible armor sets you might need for this build. And most importantly, we'll cover how you can upgrade this build as you progress the game. You might even want to use this build when the DLC comes out. The weapon we're using for this build is the Nagakiba. The reason is because it's the longest katana in the game, pretty much double the reach of the Uchigatana, and that extra reach can really come in handy. Not to mention it just looks really sick. The Nagakiba scales on both strength and dexterity, so you might want to bump those up for maximum damage. Additionally, you get a 1.5 times scaling on strength when you two-hand the weapon, and this is primarily how we're going to use this weapon. So it'll do you good to put some levels into strength, just to get some use out of this. To get the Nagakiba, we'll either have to complete Yura's quest or kill him. It's up to you to decide which way you want to go through with. Personally, I like to use this weapon straight from the start, so I killed him immediately after starting a new game. In that case, you can find Yura here, south of Lake Agil in Limgrave. Pro tip, Yura can hit you like a truck, so use Unsheath on your Uchigatana and you can pretty easily kill him. Now for the weapon skill, we'll be using Double Slash. Double Slash lets you rapidly hit enemies with successive attacks. It also allows up to 2 more follow-up attacks. This is great when combined with Bloodflame Blade, since the rapid successive attacks build up blood loss faster. You can find Double Slash in Celia. It's dropped by a scarab that's just chilling on a tree root. By far, the easiest way to obtain it is by jumping over the roofs to get to this one spot where you can kill the scarab using a bow and arrow. And Double Slash is also useful to have it be consistent with Corpse Piler on Rivers of Blood, which we'll be using later. Now moving on to the spells we'll be using. First up is Bloodflame Blade. Bloodflame Blade will allow you to apply some extra bleed damage onto your weapon. And combined with Double Slash, we have the chance to build up bleed much faster. Secondly, we're using Flame Grant Me Strength for that 20% buff on physical damage and fire damage. As for their locations, Bloodflame Blade is dropped by a scarab north of the Rose Church in Liurni. Flame Grant Me Strength can be located behind Fort Gale and between these 2 fire chariots. Finally, the talismans we'll be using. Considering this is still an early game build, we can use Radagons Soreseal and the Green Turtle Talisman to help increase our levels and stamina. The stamina recovery buff is important since Double Slash consumes a lot of stamina. At this point, your build should carry you through the early game pretty well. But now, let's talk about the endgame version of this build. This is a level 150 version of the Bloodflame Samurai. And of course, we're using Rivers of Blood. Rivers of Blood is dropped by Okina near the Church of Repose, found in the mountaintops of the Giants. If you made it to this point in the game using the Bloodflame Nagakiba build, then it would be pretty easy. With this weapon, your primary attack will be your skill. Corpse Piler has extremely long range and does bleed and fire damage. We can also use the Sacrificial Axe in our offhand to gain some FP back every time we kill some enemies. Considering that you should be going with Corpse Piler as much as you can over your light or heavy attacks, the Sacrificial Axe will give us 4 FP with every kill we get. So this is going to help give you your FP back, which will allow you to use this ability much more frequently. This weapon mainly scales on Dex and Arcane. The interesting thing about the scaling on this weapon is, even though Arcane is scaled on D, you'll still come out ahead on damage, and as a bonus, Arcane will increase your blood loss buildup, which means you'll bleed enemies even faster. Now we can still use the talismans we used before, especially the Green Turtle, but now that we're in the late game, we can also use the Winged Sword Insignia, or even the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia in our 3rd talisman slot. Both talismans increases your attack power by a percentage for every successive hit you deal. Optionally, You can also use the Shard of Alexander to increase the damage of Corpse Piler by 15%. Now, for the armor. We have a few options between style and function, or a mix of both. Of course, you can stick with the default samurai armor set if you like the look of it. Or we could use the Ronin set, which I personally like the look of. You can also use the Okina Mask, which increases your dex by +3. Or the White Mask, which will increase your attack power by 10% for 20 seconds if something around you suffers from blood loss. And considering this will happen all the time, this is a significant buff to our build. Now it's time to talk about attributes for both weapons. Starting with the Bloodflame Nagakiba build, since this is a starter to mid-game build, all we're doing is hitting the base requirements to be able to use the spells and the Nagakiba. The Nagakiba mainly scales on dexterity, which will boost up to level 22, and remember, additional to that we also have Radagons Soreseal, which will boost some of our stats by 5. Other than that, we can bump up vigor and endurance, just so we could take some hits, and be able to use the extra stamina on double slash. Moving on to the stats for the Rivers of Blood build. Considering this is an endgame, level 150 build, I've got 50 vigor, 30 mind, 18 endurance, 12 strength, 48 dexterity, 9 intelligence, 15 faith, and 50 arcane. The 50 vigor is mainly because we'll be playing a hyper-aggressive playstyle, which means we'll also probably taking a few hits. Being able to stay alive and be able to proc bleed on bosses and enemies is important, considering the weapon doesn't really break poise all that much, but we'll be able to stun enemies whenever the enemies bleed. 30 mind ensures a good FP pool for using Corpse Piler frequently. Without enough FP, you'll struggle and might need to consume your FP potions, which is not ideal. 18 endurance gives more stamina and some equip load. Stamina is an issue with this build. You'll carry a weapon in the offhand and probably a seal, so some equip load is necessary. Medium to light armor with points in endurance helps with this. Strength is not really required for this build, so it sits at 12. And between arcane and dexterity, 48 dexterity boosts Corpse Piler's damage and weapon damage. Damage increases start being negligible around this point, so both arcane and dexterity are at similar levels. Arcane might outweigh dexterity slightly, so prioritize arcane. It also helps with increasing the blood loss buildup, which is why 50 arcane is a sweet spot for damage, spells, or weapon attacks, making it a solid choice for this build. If you think this is the right build for you, I recommend watching this complete uncut guide on the locations of every single item and how to get the complete build done in about 30 minutes.